Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. Do folks still eat bird's custard here in, yeah? Yeah, well, my first visit to England was 1962. I spent a summer working in the bird's custard factory in Birmingham, England, so it was quite an experience. Good to know it's still around. I had my fill of it for that period of time. It is good to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to be at this conference. Going to be a little bit different from the presentation you just heard next door, which really focused on emerging technology and the how we'll do learning and development. And really this is all about why we do it in the first place, not how we do it, but why we do it, and how we make sure that it is highly valued by the people who have to pay for it. One of the things that Gerd mentioned was, he said one of his guidelines was find and dissect and boot your toxic assumptions. So there is one toxic assumption I want to point out as we go through the presentation here today. So just by way of some quick background, I have been in training and development for a long time. I started as a training officer in the United States Navy in 1964. Have been in training and development since then. If you want to sort of put that to an era, that was the Vietnam War through the 5 years of the peak of the Vietnam War. And a person you may know who was also in the Navy that same period of time was Senator John Kerry, who was soon to be our Secretary of State. John and I were in the Navy just exactly the same period of time. He went on to do a little better than I did as a Senator and Secretary of State. But I have one thing in my resume that I'm quite proud of that he has in his that he's probably not so proud of. I did not lose an election to George Bush. I did a doctorate in program evaluation, and I've been in evaluation and measurement all of my career about measuring and evaluating training, but then took rather a dramatic shift about 1995. I was given a grant by the World Bank for whom I had been working and doing some work around the world with them. And they asked me if I would take everything that I had learned in evaluation about why training didn't work very well and build a model that would guarantee that it would work. They said, imagine that we're betting the future of a country's economy on learning and development, and it has to work. Imagine we're betting the future of a company on learning and development, and it has to work. How would we do it? So that was the development of something called a high-impact learning model. We did research with the World Bank for 4 years. They very graciously funded that work. Then we took it out into some companies. Over the last 10 years now, we have been taking that technology, writing books about it, but more importantly, working with about 40 or 50 companies, global companies, mostly situated in the US, but not all of them. And we've licensed them and talked with them about how to use that technology. There are now about 45 companies in a user group that are using it. So what I'm going to share with you today is what that is, why it works, and how it is making a huge difference in bottom line impact of learning and development investments that can be proven to senior leadership that they are making a difference to the business. So that's really what presentation is about today. I will mention a book. We wrote a book about the user group companies called Courageous Training, and I can tell you that is available, I know, on Amazon.com, and I'll show you a reference to that at the end of that. Agenda very quickly. Want to tell you a little story that I think learning and development is a bit of a crossroads in many organizations. I want to talk about what that crossroad is and why it's important. Talk about the realities of training, how we can impact assure training. Talk about the high-impact learning model and the partnerships that are required to implement that, and then evaluation and measurement very briefly and why that is really the key to being able to execute. One of the things we learned from the 40 companies in the user group, 40-some companies, is that they had to do evaluation and measurement to earn the right to be able to show the difference they were making. So we'll speak a good bit to that. But by way of thinking for a moment just about the objective for today, I'd like to tell you a brief little story. I still do a lot of evaluation of learning and development in global companies all around the world. So this was a very large technology company, had put 200 high potential young executives through a year-long training program, leadership development program at a cost of about $45,000 US per person to put them through that. And as part of the evaluation, I asked these people, they had completed the program. I was interviewing them by telephone. And so one of the questions that I asked them was this. It is, what would happen to you, what consequence, if you never used anything from what you learned in this year-long program? What would happen to you if you never used anything from it in your daily work? What would happen to you? What do you suppose was the answer that I consistently got from everyone I talked to? Nothing. Now, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing that you can predict that? You know, and I've asked other people that question. Nothing. Now, you know, I thought about that, and that is really a very profound response. And we further talked to some people because there was a huge disconnect between the way the participants in this program and their managers and the sponsor of the program, who was the CEO of this company, saw this program. The CEO of the company, when I talked with him about why is this so important, the CEO made it very clear to me that the behaviors that people were learning in this year-long program were absolutely vital to transforming this company over the next 5 years to be able to compete in the future. Yet, everybody said, just as you predict, nothing. So, in talking with some of them, I asked them why they were in this program, how they valued it. I spoke with their managers, and in essence, they defined it as if it were a staff benefit. I don't know if that's what you call staff benefits here. But you know, look, our company's a good place to work. We give you a nice place to park your car, sheltered parking. We have a subsidized cafeteria with a 5-star chef. We have wonderful health care and insurance, lots of benefits. Oh, and we also have an outstanding learning and development function. You can learn, we help you develop your career, you'll build your resume, lots of excellent programs. So they perceived it as a staff benefit, principally. So perceived as a staff benefit, the expectation, if training and development is seen as a staff benefit, the expectation is then that you will participate and appreciate it, appreciate the opportunity. On the other hand, though, we could look at, as the CEO that spent the $12 or $16 million on this program, as an expectation that people would participate and learn and actually apply what they had learned. By the way, there was, do we have a handout for people here? I had asked for one to be printed up. Apparently, we don't have it, eh? Okay. I know they did it, they had it ready, but apparently it didn't make it. So I will, I do have a sort of a consumer edition of these slides on the website here, so you'll be able to download those as well. So here I think we were at a true crossroad. And this to me is the toxic assumption that has to be booted and dissected. If learning and development is principally viewed only as a staff development benefit, as a staff benefit, then it is vastly underleveraged. It is putting the future of your company at risk, and it is certainly putting your career at risk because you're essentially then seen as an overhead, a cost component, and not something that drives and adds value to the business. So that's one fundamental assumption here. And I want to talk about how we must do learning and development if it is truly going to be a business driver, something essential to our success and competitive advantage, not just a staff benefit. Now, learning and development clearly has value as a staff benefit. You can't recruit, you can't retain without it. But it must also be leveraged as something that drives business performance, and it is essential to business performance. So, also have an assumption I want to make very clear in that context about what is the proper goal for training and development, for learning and development. It is not learning, it is not competency, it is not return on investment. But the proper goal for learning and development, in my view, is to make important contributions to vital strategic initiatives. The role of learning and development is to make important contributions to strategic initiatives. What are important contributions? I would define them this way. They are the skills, knowledge, and importantly, the actions that are vital to accelerate execution of critical strategic action initiatives. Look, there's research that will show, and it varies, but typically 80 to 90% of failures of businesses to succeed are not because they have the wrong strategy, it's because they failed to execute the strategy they had. So, learning and development as strategy execution. So, if you look at it this way, and I'm going to show you an example in a moment, but the ideal, the impossible ideal would be that if your company has a new strategy, penetrate a new market, launch a new product, compete in a new way, that you could announce the strategy on Monday, and by Tuesday you'd have 100% of the people aligning their behavior in work in accordance with the strategy. Of course, the reality is that the expected rate of adoption is painfully slow. Painfully slow. And the reality is, in fact, that by the time you get a critical mass of people executing the strategy is now obsolete, and it's time to introduce a new one. So companies are caught up in this perpetual cycle of introducing a new strategy, trying to get people, teaching them what it is, and importantly, how do my behaviors need to change to align with it? And by the time we get critical mass, well, it's on to a new strategy. So here is how I would characterize the goal and define the value of learning and development, that it's about changing the slope of that line. And I will share with you an example from a recent client that we worked with. So I want to think about that just as the highest and best goal for learning and development is to accelerate execution of strategy. That's how we would justify our existence. That's how we would show the value that we add. So how do we do that? How do we assure that we are not only viewed as strategy accelerator, but actually are the accelerator of strategy? So I want to visit very briefly two realities of learning and development that we have proven time and again through our evaluation work. And over my career, we've probably evaluated 500 to 1,000 different learning and development programs in governments and companies all around the world. So to get to we do have the handouts. Isn't that nice? This is called just-in-time learning. Yeah. Yes, if we could just take a moment and get them out, that would be nice. If just everybody take one and pass them on. And while those are coming about, to surface the first reality of learning and development, thank you so much. Thank you. To surface the first reality, I want to ask you a question. What percent of trainees, and let me put this in the context of management development, leadership development, soft skill. What percent of trainees actually apply their learning in their work in a way that is aligned with business strategy that produces concrete and worthwhile results? So I want you to imagine that you have done the definitive research on impact of training. You've studied, like I have, hundreds of management development, leadership development, supervision 101 programs in all sorts of different industries, in all different cultures. And you have followed up every single one of those people who participated in that training to find the answer to this question. What percent of them have actually applied their learning in their work in a way that's aligned with strategy and that's producing a concrete and a worthwhile result? If you would just take one moment, please, and jot down that percent. Just, you've already done the research. It should only take you just a minute to jot it down. And very quickly share your percent now with a neighbor. What do you got? Okay, time's up. Time is up. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to do this a couple of times. Actually, I would like you to admire the skill with which I do interrupt. I am a trained professor. I have been certified as a professor. And by the way, one of the competencies we have to demonstrate when we get certified as a professor is we have to be able to identify instances where independent learning could be taking place. And then we have to seize control and nip them in the bud, right? So, sorry. I did well, eh? So somebody offer me, what's your prediction? 5, I have 5. I have 10. 20. Do I have more than 20? 23 or 3? Sold. Actually, you predicted it. Yeah, what does the research show? It shows that it's typically less than 20%. It's been creeping up a bit over the years. 10 years ago, we were estimating 9 to 11%. It's closer to 20% now. Here's something rather shocking, though. If you think how learning technology has changed over the last 40 years. Think of the number of professional vendors that are in the field of learning technology. Think of how the quality of learning interventions has truly changed over the years. We know much more about instructional design than we used to about adult learning. We have vendors in the field like DDI or Blanchard and Associates who produce marvelous programs that are beautifully researched, that are full of excellent adult learning and all, so that the quality of our interventions has gone up. This number has not shifted very much over 40 years. So what's going on with that? Well, so that's sort of reality number one, is that training gets predictable results. We even went so far, my colleagues and I, as we were trying to make a living evaluating programs, very difficult to get companies to pay for they're happy to pay for training, but not to see if it works or not. So it was hard to sell. So we actually said, well, look, we could do this quite cheaply if we could just get rid of that pesky data collection portion. That's the costly part of evaluation, and just give them reports. So we talked about the data-free evaluation model, and it was very simple. Tell me how many people you've put through training, and I'll tell you what you got. I'll tell you right now, some of them are using it and getting great results. Some of them are not doing jack. That's a technical evaluation term. And others are tried a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and have given up because they couldn't make it work or they got punished or whatever for trying it. So training gets predictable results. That is reality number one. And we have never seen a program where 100% of the people have gotten results, and we've typically never seen it where it's been 0. And I can tell you, now I have seen programs where we did get 100% results, and those were the sorts of programs I ran when I was in the U.S. Navy. One of the courses that we taught at our fleet school was how to dislodge. Imagine you're 200 feet down, submerged in your nuclear submarine, and a live torpedo has become lodged in the front torpedo tube. How do you disarm that torpedo without having it explode and sink the submarine? We ran a course on that. 20%? No. We did much better than that. So it depends. Technical training gets much better results than management and leadership training. That's the good news. The bad news is technical training is much lower leverage and has less bottom line impact than management and leadership training. So the kind of training that can make the greatest difference, unfortunately, works the least well. So that's sort of the reality. You know, you typically get a distribution around like that. It varies depending on the sort of training. Something that's important to know from this predictableness notion is that return on investment, ROI, is completely driven by the number of people who are in that right-hand portion of the distribution. Whenever you do training in your company, you pay for the whole, you buy the whole distribution. You just get a return from those who use it. And often that return's dramatic, and it's often a multiple, but there's a huge unrealized value component. So here's just a little example. Imagine you put 100 people through training. Imagine that 10% of them used it well, got great results, that were worth, say, $50,000 per person in a quarter, and that would be not an unusual sort of finding. So you'd have a total return on that of $500,000. However, you got 90 people who didn't use it. Well, what if they all use it as well as those 10? Then there's $4.5 million more of unrealized value. So this is one of the things we measure when we do evaluation, is not only the realized value, but the unrealized value, because it becomes a very powerful, and I'll show you how we use that to begin to make an argument to transform the learning and development into a high-impact learning organization. Now look, there's two explanations for that distribution. 100 people went through, 10 people used it. One explanation is that this training is 100% effective, that only those 10 could have used it, and the other 90 are too ignorant or incompetent to have made use of it. The second explanation is that more people could have been in that right-hand portion, but something got in their way. Which is the more likely explanation? Second one, obviously. You wouldn't even be in this profession if you didn't believe that. You would have quit long ago. So that's the reality, you know, that the typical training leaves more money on the table than it puts into your organization's pocket. And we've got to change that. So what? Well, here's a quick example from strategy acceleration. In 15 to 20, I mean, what's wrong with that? That's not so bad. That's what we've been getting for the last 40 or 50 years. What's the big deal? Why is that a problem? Well, let me show you from an example of a client we just worked with. This is a national pharmacy. I don't know if you have them here in the UK. We have national pharmacies that have just thousands of their chain pharmacies owned by a big corporation. There's thousands of their stores all around. And the world of pharmacies is changing quite dramatically. You can now go to a pharmacy, it's almost an emergency medical clinic. You can go there for your flu shot. You can go there not only to get your prescribed medications, but they're actually medical interventionists now. So the strategic orientation is really changing quite dramatically. So this national chain put together a new strategy, and here you see some of the information about it. It was intended to, when they executed the strategy, they would actually increase margins in every store by $10,000 per month. They do this by reallocating personnel as well as driving new revenues, but mostly through cost reduction by having pharmacists actually, most pharmacists spend 60% of their time counting pills in the back. So you're paying the people who the greatest money to do the lowest leverage job. So they did a lot of changing around, introduced technology, increasing loyalty, customer base, and so on. And by the way, their three major competitors were introducing exactly the same strategy because of the changing medical context in the United States. So we had a conversation with management. We said, look, if you get 10% of your stores in the first quarter executing this strategy, then that represents increased margins of $12 million. If we can change that to 20% of the stores in the quarter, then that return goes to nearly $25 million. If we can get 30% of stores doing it in the first quarter, then now we're looking at a $35 million return. So the conversation with senior leadership was, what do you need to be successful? How fast do we have to do this? And this began then to set exactly the framework for the conversation between learning and development and the strategic leaders about what do we have to do in learning and development to get this done. But that's the cost of not accelerating strategy, or that's the gain to be made from accelerating strategy. So that's why it is so important that we talk about the rate of execution, the rate of adoption in training, because a 20% effectiveness rate will simply not get you the strategic acceleration you need in mission-critical training. Now, what I want to share with you from this example on forward, when we talk about why we're doing this, would you do all of the learning and development in your organization the way I'm going to share with you? No. Because there's still a lot of the stuff you're going to do, onboarding, career development, career management, a lot of it will still be in that staff development bucket. But some of it has to be in this strategy accelerator bucket. So we're really talking about probably that 10% of your learning and development portfolio that probably adds 90+% of the value return on investment to your organization. So lessons of reality number one, aim to grow impact. Aim to change the shape of that predictable distribution. Measure and convert unrealized value. Know that return on investment is driven by a simple formula. It's the percent of the people who actually use their training effectively when they're done learning. So the mission is not to do great training, and a lot of what we learn in conferences is how to do great training. And not that that's not important, we have to do it. But the mission is instead, help your company get great results from the training you do. And that to me is a fundamental shift in mission. It's not about doing great training. It's not about delivering great learning. It's about helping your company, your organization, get great results from the learning you do. That makes sense to folks? So let's jump then to reality number two. You know, here would be a different distribution. And we call this the courageous training goal. And in our user group, for mission-critical training, when they go about doing it, they set a goal of 80 to 90%. If they're going to put people through training that is meant to execute strategy, they're looking for a 90% transfer rate, application rate. And they're getting it, by the way. So the question you got to ask is, why aren't we there now? Why isn't it this? Why is it the 20%? Why aren't we there now? And that takes us to reality number two. So let me quickly walk through that. There's sort of a mythical view of training and development. So, well, look, we need to get some good results. We've got to get people behaving differently. We've got to do this learning to get people to reduce scrap, to increase market share, to sell more product. We have to get some results that are important to our business. So this time, let's really do a great job of training. Got it? I mean really great. Let's build in technology. Let's build in mobile learning. Let's have a blended solution. Let's have people maybe spend 3 days at the Wharton School or the London School of Economics. I mean, let's do it really great, okay? Because this is important. We're not kidding this time. We need results. And that's the mythical view, that if you just do it right, you ought to get the results, if you do it really well. But the reality is that if you look at a learning and development intervention, there's a lot of stuff that happened before it, and there's a lot of stuff that happens after it. And that learning event, whether it's a 2-day workshop or a year-long job rotation or a blended solution with a lot of components, all of that stuff, all of the intervention we do that's helped people develop new skill and knowledge, the learning event is but a bit player in the drama of getting results. That what happens before and after training has more to do with the results than the quality of the learning event itself. Let me just tell you very quickly how we had this demonstrated to us. Like, we have a phrase in America, getting hit upside the head with a 2x4. I don't know what that would be in metric conversion, but we had contracts for a while with some different vendors, with DDI, principally with Blanchard Training and Development, who do some superb stuff. So we were evaluating then situational leadership too, which was being implemented in different companies. Here's what we noticed after a couple of years. We could go into one company, they're using situational leadership, getting great results. Big percentage of people using it well, driving bottom line impact. Go into another company, a couple of weeks later, do an evaluation, maybe even the same industry, they're using exactly the same program, they're hardly getting any results. Within the same company, this business unit, getting great results. This business unit, not getting such good results. Within the same course, these people were doing great, these people weren't. What was going on? Here, the training intervention was precisely the same. Exactly the same materials, exactly the same facilitators, exactly the same exercises. Everything was the same about the learning intervention. The only thing that was changing was the results were varying wildly. So, as a trained researcher, I understood that if you're holding the treatment constant, but the outcomes are varying, something else is going on. So we began to explore those something else's and did several years of research on that. And what we know is that those something else's are what make the huge difference. Do you have to do a good job of the learning event? Absolutely. But if the before and after stuff is not done well, it doesn't matter how good it was, it isn't going to get results. So I want to look at this reality. Reality number 2 is when training doesn't work, it isn't because training didn't work. Right? It's because something else went wrong. So we'll talk about that. So training alone is never the principal cause of success or failure. So we don't evaluate training. What we evaluate instead is how well your organization is using training to get results. So the focus is off the training. So we don't do this sort of Kirkpatrick thing, looking at the training itself. We're looking at what's your organization doing right and what isn't it doing right around the way it delivers training. And here's sort of the bottom line lesson from this. You can't delegate responsibility for results from training to the Learning and Development Department. The Learning and Development Department does not have its hands on the levers that need to be pushed and pulled to drive the results. So the Learning and Development Department can't be held accountable for the results, but producing results is a whole organization accountability. And that's basically the lesson that you need to begin to teach and that these user group companies are teaching, and they're profoundly changing behavior with that learning. So this is sort of learning within learning. This is the lesson that needs to be taught to your company through the way you do learning and development and through the way you measure it and communicate it. So we'll look at that. What's it take to make it work? The truth is that if you're serious about getting a return on a training investment, if you're serious about it and you need the results, there's 3 things you've got to do well. The first thing you've got to do well is you have to create focus and build intentionality and create alignment. And this is principally through interacting with senior leaders and sponsors of a program and making sure that from the C-suite to the managers of learners to the learners themselves, that there is clear alignment about why is this training important to our company, who is going to learn what, how are they going to be expected to use it in their work, and who is going to help them use it, and who is going to be accountable for whether they use it or not. And there has to be agreement top to bottom, and that may take some time to develop that alignment. You have to provide quality learning interventions. They do have to be good. They need to have the right elements of different modalities. They have to make use of all the technology you have at hand. They must make use of the principles of adult learning. So they have to be good. And then importantly, you have to support performance afterwards. There have to be mechanisms in place to support performance, because learning is most fragile when it's new, and when people get back into the hustle and bustle and the semi-toxic environment of their workplace, it's very easy to get learning undone quite quickly. So what we do know is that a manager can undo in 30 seconds what it took a learning and development department a year to produce. And it's not at all difficult. Let me just quickly role play that with someone here, if I might. Emily, you work in my department, don't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and weren't you at training last week?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, good. How was it? Good stuff?
Yeah, it was interesting.
I really wanted you. So you enjoyed it? It was good?
Yeah.
Great, glad to hear that. Let me just make something clear, okay? We can look at the world in two ways. We can look at the world the way you learned it there, training. And then we could look at the world the way we do things here in my unit. So let me ask you, where are you now? Here, right? My unit, okay? Clear how we're going to do things then? Good. Right. Okay? No problem, eh? So you can throw all your notes away and stuff like that, because we don't want to see you doing that here. Good. So that's the reality. Now, is it always that blatant? No, but sometimes it is. So that is the reality. And the greatest opportunities you have for improvement and leverage are not in building more technology into your learning interventions. Look at it this way. If you have $1 to spend, you're probably best off spending that dollar. If you have £1 to spend, you're better off spending that pound, and that would be about $3 actually. You're better off spending that pound, getting one more manager aligned to understand, why is this training important? Why do I need to support my people in it? And how will it make a difference to me as a manager? Get one more manager aligned, then you are making that a higher quality, more powerful learning intervention, trying to build in more memory or whatever it would be for the learners. So that's really where we need to be. So that's the conceptual framework for the high-impact learning model. Let me show you now the operational model, what it looks like in practice. And then I want to show you some evaluation data from it, and then we'll just have we can address some questions. Implementing this model requires new actions from managers, and sustaining this approach is a whole organization accountability, not just learning and developments. So business impact basically, if you think of it as a symphony or as a performance, there are 4 key players: senior leaders and executives, the sponsors of the program, the people who pay for it, the managers of the trainees, whatever level they're at, whether they're vice presidents or shop workers, the trainees and the training leaders, that's you folks, the people who are responsible for this. That there are about 3 to 6 actions that each of them must take. We know what they are. I can define them for you, and I'm not going to go through that list here because we don't have time to do that, but I can get you that information. But Each of them has things they must do, and if they don't do them, they detract from the business impact. So let me walk you quickly through the high-impact learning process, which sort of shows at a graphic level who does what. Let's imagine, there's still a learning program. Let's imagine for this scenario that it's a 2-day leadership development program that's preceded with some learning modules and has some follow-up online activities, and there's some pre-work, etc. All of that is inside that blue box in the middle there. But before that happens, there's some things we've got to do. One of the things is we need to clarify the overall business goal and linkage, and we have to make that clear to senior leaders and the managers of the trainees so that everybody has a line of sight from what's the need for this program, what's it going to take to execute it, and importantly, what are people supposed to do with it when they're at work. All of that has to be clarified beforehand, and that may take some time to do, and there's special tools for doing that. The second thing that has to happen is that managers have to be educated and motivated. They have to understand, I as a manager have to understand, what is this training going to do for me? If I have you, the people in my work unit, participate in this training, what's it going to do for my accountabilities? Because that's what I'm accountable for. How is your performance going to help drive the things that I get measured for? What we know is this, and we've asked managers this: do you support training and development? Do you support it for your people? 100% of them say yes. How do they define? The operational definition of support for training for managers is permission to go and budget. Yeah, do you support training? Absolutely, I'll let you go, for God's sake. I mean, I had to rejuggle schedules and all, had to get Constance to take over this and Emily that. It's been a nightmare, of course, but I hope you go. Yeah, so I support it. So educate and motivate managers, and there's something in that box that managers learn how to do. They learn how to have a 15-minute dialogue with each and every trainee who's going to participate in this, and during that dialogue, they create a line of sight from. So if I'm having that dialogue with you, we're going to talk about what are you going to learn, when and how are you going to use it, what am I going to do to support you use it, and what are you going to be accountable for doing with it when you're back at work. So we're going to have that dialogue before you go, and that's going to get documented. Think of that as an action plan before the fact. And then managers are going to have that impact map dialogue before the learner goes to the training. During the training, we're going to do a few things. That impact map, the tool that gets produced in that third box, is going to be used by the facilitator of the learning and development program to organize people together, to have them track their progress, etc. And then learners are going to prepare an action plan following whatever this learning and development intervention is, and maybe it happens several times if it's stretched out. That impact map is going to be communicated typically through the internet to the manager. And now they're going to have another 10 to 15-minute dialogue, either a face-to-face meeting or a teleconference or Skype or whatever. And they're going to talk about that action plan and who's accountable for what. And then the managers are going to provide some ongoing support and coaching, and there'll be some tools to help both parties do that. So this 2-day intervention probably stretches out into something that goes from 4 to 6 weeks to maybe even a year long. And that's what people have to do to make that work if you're going to get that 80 to 90% stick rate and execution rate. So that is the high-impact learning process, sort of operationally defined. Now, as you look at that, well, imagine this. Imagine that your company had just bought this system, said, we're going to do it this way. What's going through your head right now as the learning and development people? Yeah. Right.
How are we going to get the managers to do it?
Yeah, you got to be kidding me, right? How am I going to get the managers to do that? We already have trouble getting managers to come to training when it's for them. Now you want me to Now you want me to put on training about training? You've got to be kidding me.
What if the training's for both? They're all going through this.
Yeah.
Managers and learners.
No, the managers are having they're having an intervention prior to their learners going through that might orient them to what it's about, actually. So, yeah, most people, they look at this and say, good God, you've got to be kidding me. You can't possibly do that. Maybe that works somewhere else. You don't understand my company. Our managers would never do this. What do you?
The issue that I'm facing, because we apply this,
Yeah?
we apply this, but the issue that I'm facing is how to measure the manager
How to measure the manager.
and to track of everything.
Yeah, that's very tough. So look, let me just give you this little quiz here. If you were to introduce the system tomorrow, here's how our managers would react. I'm going to give you 3 choices. All of them would do all of it. None of them would do any of it. Some of them would do some of it. What's your choice?
Probably another option, that all of them would say they do all of it, none of them would actually do anything.
Yes, yes, there's always that. But in reality, where would you be? The third one, some would do some of it. Perfect. It's what always happens. Now you have your control group.
It's actually the ideal that we never can reach.
Probably the ideal is that all of them would do all of it, but for sure when you introduce it, you're nowhere near that, but some of them do some of it. And that gives you your control group. And this is where sort of the magic sauce, the missing ingredient, is we measure the effectiveness of this whole thing with an evaluation methodology we call the success case method. It wouldn't have to be used with that, but let me show you the sorts of data. So you execute it, you make these tools available. One of the things we learned from our user group is we don't make any of this stuff mandatory. So we don't say, oh, you can't, if you don't have an impact map, sorry, can't come to the training, got to have your mission, you got to have met with your manager. Because people will just say they did it and they'll forge the initials. You know, managers can beat any system you put in place. You know that. That's why they're managers. Didn't get there, you know, that's not an easy route to get there. So, but you measure it. So here's, that's the key to transformation. That is, every organization we've worked with, it's taking them at least 2 to 4 years to begin to get traction with this, and the key to transformation is the measurement part. So these are some of the questions that get asked. Who used their learning and who didn't? When it was used, what good did it do? That's building the economic case for it. What was the value achieved by those who used it? When it was used, why? Who did what to help them use it? When it wasn't used, why? Who did or did not do what that created obstacles? And importantly, who needs to do what to get more people to use it the next time we do it? And those are the key. That, in essence, is the... If you get answers to those questions, now you've got your organization sort of over the barrel that you can now drive some change.
In effect, it's actually another intervention.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it really is. It truly is. Because now the feedback to the organization is that it's sort of Barbarossa guerrilla tactic, teaching within teaching intervention, absolutely. And now, let me just share with you some typical findings. And these would be out of the user group. So here you had 300 people went through some training. And we partitioned that audience into the 60% of the learners who got the highest impact, who used their training and got results. And we measured some economic value of that. And for this example, the value of that was $20,000 per. Each of those 60 produced about $20,000 worth of value through using their new management skills. This happens to be from a large retail chain with training store managers in things like how to stop loss, increase retention, et cetera. So anyway, $20,000 of value in the first quarter after the training. Then the 60 lowest impact, they didn't use the training at all. They represented a net loss of about $1,500 per person. That was the cost of them participating in the training. So I've got a high group and a low group, right? Then we compare that to some data that we collected. How many of their managers actually completed what we called the Impact Booster? That was the education session for managers. That actually was done at a mandatory manager meeting, so all of them got it, so you see it didn't differentiate. Now, still not all of them did it. Some of them weaseled their way out of it, but most of them did it. So it really didn't differentiate. But then we looked at how many, in the two groups, how many of the trainees and managers actually met, had the dialogue, and completed that impact map dialogue. In the high group, it was 55, 91%. In the low group, 20%. Okay, how many of them then had the after-training dialogue to talk about the action plan? How many of them actually got supported afterwards? In the high group, 86%. In the low group, 7%. Now, when you've got this data, this isn't data that comes back to the learning and development department. You say, I wonder how we evaluate the training. This data goes right back to senior leadership, because now you talk about, here's what we spent on this training. I got some good news for you, and I got some bad news. The good news is this training is making 60 times $20,000 worth of difference in the first group of stores we put through the training. It's dropping a lot of money to the bottom line. In fact, it's more than paid for the training for everybody to go through. The bad news is most people are not using it. And so we're leaving a lot of money on the table. Now here's a little more good news. What we do know is some things that if your managers, those people, senior leaders who report to you, did, we could see these numbers double or perhaps triple. And then senior leaders say, so give me an idea of what those things are that they need to do. And now you're getting the feedback to the right place, to the people who have their hands on the levers that can make a difference. We're going to be having a free webinar fairly soon from the Kroger company. Kroger's the largest supermarket food purveyor in the United States. It comes back to a question you made, managers being accountable for this. That they've been implementing this system at Kroger. Now the supporting training requirements are built into store managers' performance measurement system. And they can be fired if they don't do the things that have to be done to support the training. So it's built into their performance management system. And that's true in some other organizations. See, this is what we learned, the measurement of this is so crucial because you have to make a business case for managers to use these tools. Managers are paid to make business decisions. You've got to give them a business reason to support training. Too often, when we ask managers, we'll say, the message is, we're a team here, guys. I'm training your managers. We really need your help. We really need your help. Training isn't going to work without it. In other words, I am coming to you as supplicant. Please support me. I got a rotten job, and I'm training all these people, and I need some support. I can't do it without you. So now when I have this data, I can come to you not as supplicant, but as counselor and consultant. And I can say, look, I know you're struggling in your district with retention, and I know what it's costing your store. And we've got some training that you might be interested in hearing about, because where it's getting used, it's actually increasing bottom line 16%, and it's reduced attrition by 60%. I'd like to talk to you about that training, because you may be interested in getting in your store. Is it a magic pill? No. Just sending your people ain't going to do it. There's some things you'll have to do, but they're not going to take you long. Let's talk about it. So I'm not coming to you as a supplicant saying, I need you to help me get my stuff done. I say, no, I've got some tools that are going to help you get your job done. And that's rather a dramatic shift. So, folks, that in a nutshell is this sort of whole high-impact learning story and journey. And do we have some time left for people who have some questions?
4 or 5 minutes.
Let me put this grossly commercial slide up. Yes, sir, please.
Like that's a provocative question. If we're saying that what happens before and after the training is the most impactful one, why don't we just focus on that and do away with the learning event?
Yeah.
70-20
Yeah.
10 models, so just do the 70-20.
Yeah, just do the 70-20. Well, the reality is, though, that people will need, the shelf life of the skill set depends on the industry. It's pretty short-lived. So there's no doubt about it that people will need a new skill set, new knowledge. But so I don't think you can do away with that unless you can figure out another way to get it to them. And maybe Gerd would have some ideas about some, implants and the like. But so I don't think you can do away with it, but you can't just do it. That's all. I mean, I think it is necessary, it will always be necessary, but it's never been sufficient and it will never be sufficient. So, yeah.
Lady at the back there.
Yeah, yes, please.
Hi, how did you identify that impact figure of £20,000? Because if I'm doing a leadership management course and I'm saying that I'm senior executive, for each person that's successfully using it, they're going to give us 20K, they're going to say to me, evidence.
Yeah, evidence. Well, we do collect data. This success case evaluation method, and you can read about it online. I can get you articles about it. There's a book about it. It is a rather simple method for getting that sort of data, but it's based on a pretty fundamental premise, that soft skills training, which is this management, leadership development stuff, have to get executed as behaviors, and those behaviors always will have an economic value. And so we will, now do we always dollarize it? No. I would say only in about 30% of the evaluations we dollarize it. Sometimes just the behavioral information is all that's needed. So for example, in one company that was having severe attrition problems, their personnel are getting rated because they're so well trained that other companies want to hire them all the time. So they know, because the research shows that the biggest reason people leave a job is they don't get along with their manager, they don't get supported by their manager. So the training was all about, for managers, how to get closer to, how to be more engaged with their employees, and that came down to 4 different behaviors. So all we had to do was document the behaviors and show that when the success is managers who do these behaviors 80% of the time versus only do them 10% of the time. So, but often you can dollarize it. All learning has to be transferred into behavior, otherwise no behavior, no impact. Yes, please.
Do you ever work with public sector organisations where it's much more difficult to dollarize that?
Yes. Yeah, we do. We do a lot of work with social welfare programs and the like. And there we don't try to dollarize it, but we just look at what are the mission critical behaviors. So for example, in a social welfare agency that's introduced some new software to make the assignment of people to casework and so on more efficient, work more effectively, we simply count what's the increase in service delivery time interaction versus administrative tasks and the like, because that was the goal of the training. So it's always about the value. Really, outcomes of training are fragile and much less robust than behaviors. I think behaviors are robust. So, with a sales organization, they did some very successful training. Their people were much more successful, but they didn't sell any more product, but they were still successful. It was because they changed their behaviors, and the behaviors were very robust. The outcomes are much more likely to be influenced by a down market, a variation in the economy. So you don't need to worry too much about sort of those dollarized outcomes, because A robust behavior will see you through bad times, whereas a metric that made, sales went up 10%, well, it might have been anything could have caused that. So, other questions?
I think we're out of time.
All right.
So
Well,
anyway,
I'll-
I'm sure if anybody has a question, they could.
I'll be hanging around. And by the
detain.
way, I have an email address. I believe it's on the handout for you. So if you have questions, a couple of contacts, be happy to respond to you. It'll be after. It isn't? Oh. On the last slide, I hope.
Last slide.
Sorry, the very last slide should show some contact information. Would be happy to get, we're just an hour, folks. It's not enough time. We need at least an hour and a half to do it all. So, but I'd be happy to follow up with you if you have questions. Give me 10 days before I get back to the U.S., and then be happy to respond to you. But thanks so much for attending. Have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.